Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of the Edtech Show with me, Buki Yusuf, who's one of your hosts today. I hope you are all keeping well as we continue with some of the storms and things like that in the UK. And I hope if you're joining us from around the world that you're keeping well as well. We have a fantastic lineup of different segments this month, including looking at the importance of visions and values when it comes to developing the EdTech vision, looking at digital storytelling and research and findings about the most effective ways to implement blended learning. But before I continue, let's say hello to my second guest, this host today, Ronan. Ronan, would you like to come and say hello to everyone, please?
Hiya, absolutely. Once again, a real pleasure, Bucky. Thank you.
So how have you been keeping?
Yeah, pretty good. It's been another busy month, professionally, personally. Lots of OneNote, Microsoft to do, having a bit of fun with that. Waiting on some iPads to arrive. Half term, so managed to squeeze in a bit of downtime. Not really liking the whole geopolitical scene at the moment, but let's not get into all that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so let's actually take our minds off with that and actually look at some of the fantastic things that are happening around the world with regards to EdTech. And then on that particular note, what I'd like to do is to introduce Mark Anderson's segment, looking at the importance of visions and values when it comes to EdTech development. Hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Mark Anderson, ICT Evangelist here. Welcome to this segment on the Edtech Show, our 6th episode so far in this our Edtech Show. In this segment, I wanted to explore the importance of vision and values when it comes to developing educational technology. Look, you know, education is an important morally driven business. And I say business because, you know, schools do deal with huge budgets. Sure, a large portion of that will go on to things such as teachers' salaries. But when technology costs so much, it's really important to consider that it's just too expensive to leave to chance. Now, we might be sort of forgiven for thinking, you know, technology over the course of the past 20, 30 years in education hasn't fulfilled on its promise, but things have changed massively in terms of its efficacy and the points of view of educators and school leaders in how technology can be successfully implemented in the classroom. And so in this segment, I'm really delighted to welcome in 3 CEOs and managing directors of some very successful educational technology companies to get their perspectives on why it's important to have strong vision and values when it comes to developing technology across 3 different types of technology in the education space.
I'm Al Kingsley, and my job title is Group CEO of NetSupport.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Leach, and I'm Managing Director at Tute Education.
Hi, I'm Priya Lakhani. I'm the founder and chief executive of Century Tech.
So NetSupport, we've been going 31 years. 32 actually, so we're kind of getting the hang of the edtech sector. We're a software developer, no surprise, and we create a range of edtech solutions for schools. I often refer to them as the layers of an onion, Mark, but in essence, we have the wraparound tools that manage the IT assets, all those devices and infrastructure that you've got so that you can make sure they're operational and working. Tools that wrap around that to provide online safety and safeguarding support for all of our digital learners. Tools to facilitate classroom orchestration, teachers seeing the kids and shepherding what they're doing in the classroom. Tools to send communications either to selected staff or the whole school, so good for emergency lockdown procedures. Early years and key stage 1 assessment solutions, service desk solutions, remote management solutions, a real package so that we can support schools at every different facet of their IT needs.
So Tute has a team of qualified teachers who deliver online lessons to help schools, local authorities and non-mainstream settings to fill gaps in the education of their students. We deliver lessons in about 30 subjects across all key stages, and we've now delivered about 100,000 lessons to about 15,000 students in over 650 schools.
So Sentry is a teaching and learning platform, and what's really different about it is that it's a blend of artificial intelligence and machine that learns by itself with neuroscientific theory. So we try and understand how the brain learns, and we take theories from across the globe and we implement those within our technology to try and increase impact and increase outcomes using those theories. And learning science. So we have a small army of teachers at Sentry who understands teaching and learning in the classroom. We blended all of those things to create a platform that hosts content across different curricula, different languages, different courses, and it learns how your brain learns. And so it adapts and personalizes for the student using that blend of technology. And then it takes all of the data insights and provides them to teachers in real time.
Yeah, we actually surveyed our staff a few months ago to ask them what they thought our core values were and what they should be. And the ones that came out on top were teamwork, quality, positivity, and professionalism. And then of those, the values at the core of TUTE are really quality and teamwork. And I believe that one's not really possible without the other. So we can't really achieve the quality service that we want to give to our customers without making sure that we're working as a team. Those values shape what we do in, firstly, that we recognise that quality is holistic, so it runs through everything that we do, and everyone in the team impacts the service that we deliver to our customers and our students.
Net Support is heavily invested in education in the broadest sense, and if you're invested in that, there's two aspects that really come to our values. The one is to recognise the core value in education of sharing. So we're very much built around providing a platform for educators to share their skills and experience and insights. We try and provide lots of resources to support educators. But alongside that, that lifelong learning mantra that sits inside what we do is really wrapped around that idea of co-production. And that's not just developing a product and sitting down with a group of educators at the same time. And we have many, as you know yourself, working within the organization. It's actually much more than that. It's a fundamental around the concept of not just the why are we creating a product? Well, my first view is you don't create a product and then try and convince people they need it. You identify the need, you understand the need, and you provide solutions that are fit for purpose from day one. And that links into longevity. You don't have a 30-year history within the edtech space if you don't develop technology that's right and has an appropriate fit and need at the time. So we absolutely look at that sustainability, that longer term. We're in it for the long haul. And so by doing that as a business and as individuals, we're absolutely embraced in that community aspect.
Yeah, the core values at Sentry are really very simple, and they're actually on the front of everyone's contracts when they join Sentry. And the reason this is really important is because we have to behave in a certain way. We have to have the same sorts of goals in order to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. It's a very large sector, education, and it's very complicated. So you have to be very, very clear with those values. The first value at Sentry is always do the right thing. So it's actually nothing to do with education specifically, but it's always do the right thing and try and be kind doing it. And the second is to improve the lives of many through education. Those are really important, very simple values, but they do help guide a company like Sentry. We have over 90 employees at Sentry. And so, in order to ensure that we are, there's always lots of things that you can do in education, lots of things that you can build and lots of ideas, but it really helps guide you in terms of, is that something that can then lead to improved outcomes? So having those sorts of values is really key. And another reason why it's really important to have those values is when you're running a company where we're at the cutting edge of innovation. So we're building technology, we're using artificial intelligence technology. With that, it goes part and parcel with big data. It's one of the reasons why over 2 years, no matter how busy we were at Century, I co-founded the Institute of Ethical AI with Sir Anthony Selden, Professor Rose Luckin, and Lord Clement Jones chaired it. And we were the founders, but with AI, you've got to be very conscious of things like algorithm bias. You've got to be conscious of how you develop the technology, what kind of recommendations you might be making. This is where having core values and having stated them, and when you recruit people, you're growing, your company, your social enterprise, at level sort of beyond 20 or 30 people, it's very, very important to have those. And that really, you can see that in the product.
I think the values feed in fundamentally. I think they feed in not only to how we create new products, which is having that involvement and relationship and working practice within education, that we identify needs when they occur, and we have to recognize it's a constantly moving landscape. So that not only feeds into the product development at the start, but also feeds into the evolution of the solutions as we move forward. It's very easy as a vendor to create a solution and say, there you go, it's brilliant, now buy it. When in reality, what you need to be doing is saying, there's a solution that's brilliant, we hope, but actually it's got to constantly evolve and adapt to reflect the changes that we're seeing within the education landscape. So that co-production is not just at the start, it's a relationship that is continual through the product. And I hope it's a win-win, because the people, the educators we work with, the schools that we support, get products that are right and fit and current. And as a vendor, we constantly learn, we constantly improve our products by that dynamic and relationship.
So we strive with our schools to be a partner, not just a provider. So to achieve that, we have to work as a team in-house, of course, and then also with our customers as much as we possibly can around their capacity constraints. So, it's great to tell the schools that we want to be their partner, but they have to have the time to invest in that as well. So we try to take on as much of the heavy lifting as we can.
So our values feed into how we interact with schools, because our values are our North Star. And it's really important for any business, any company, any school to have its North Star. What's your purpose and what are your values? And so the values of the North Star, they sort of they're the guiding principles as to why we're doing what we're doing. And they allow us to make certain decisions and help us actually making decisions, because sometimes when things look really complicated, actually the answer is really easy if you think about your values and why you're doing what you're doing. And we've spoken about the educator being central to that, and so it's about having all the right voices at the table to then be able to provide that solution.
I think it's really important when we think about having an ear to the voice of the sector, to educators, that feeds into our product development. It's very easy, and I think many vendors end up in a little bit of their own echo chamber by only listening to the voice of their customers. And you could argue by definition, the customers are the people that have chosen your solution, so already have a degree of buy-in and positivity. What I'm actually interested in is the broader market, the people that don't feel our solutions are appropriate or haven't to date, and also those outside of where we provide solutions, to understand what the current challenges are. So the only way you can listen to a broader voice as a business is twofold. You can invite those voices to come and share their views with you. And that feeds into why we have the Rise magazine, NetSport Radio, the different events and activities we do, to try and make sure that those breadth of voices are reflected. And whilst we're sharing, back to my earlier points, we're also listening. And I think that's really, really key. And then I think the second point is, everything is so interwoven within education that you can't talk about EdTech without understanding the broader challenges and pressures. So the only way to have that broader voice is to roll your sleeves up and get involved, be involved. I've been involved in school governance and supporting the acquisition of new schools for 25 years, and I'm still learning. and the landscape and the challenges still change. And I think fundamentally that is the key. If you have vendors with solutions and they don't have that interwoven relationship within the sector, my view is always the solutions are likely to not have the longevity that you hope for.
We do listen, we always listen. And then, of course, our customers. So we hold review meetings with them frequently and we survey them. Sometimes we don't get as many responses as we would like because of the pressures in schools and their capacity issues. But when we certainly do act when we receive feedback, and that could be something as simple as wanting another GCSE subject that we'll then go and recruit a teacher for, or it could be something that happens in our learning cloud, a feature that schools want and that's not there yet. So we add that to our development roadmap.
We don't develop anything at Century without the educator voice being right at the front and the centre of it. And, most businesses fail not because they can't get funding or because they're struggling with talent. Most businesses fail because they've not built a product or service that anyone needs or wants. And so in an edtech company, it is absolutely essential to have the educator voice right at the heart of the company.
I think you have to involve teachers in some way or another because they know what it's like and they know what's needed. Secondly, to understand and appreciate that selling to schools is not straightforward. It takes a long time. Teachers who really like the product are not always decision makers, and heads are very busy, so pinning them down to make decisions sometimes is really tough. And importantly as well is to recognise that you have to do your best to get it right because you're impacting on student outcomes. You have to do your best to get it right. There's sometimes little room for manoeuvre when you're evaluating and when you're trialing things because it is impacting on students. And then again, make sure that at the core of it, you really want to make a difference. So for me, that's why I came into teaching, like you, Mark. And you can do that without being a teacher. You can do it by being a part of education. But it really does have to mean something to you. And if that's the case, then that is something that gives you really good direction and it keeps you going as well. Things aren't easy.
Yeah, the sort of advice I'd give to any budding entrepreneur or teacher in a school who wants to come up with a new solution for a problem they've got is define the problem that you're trying to solve. I think you should be trying to solve a problem and you should be able to succinctly describe what that is, or you should be at least trying to create a new opportunity, and what does that look like and try and articulate that. And then set your values. Like, why are you doing it? And I think that's really important. We keep saying to anyone who joins Century, even any school that joins Century as a partner, we always tell people our why. And it's really important.
I think there's a number of strands. The first is to know the market, so actually understand and have the right engagement with your ultimate customer base. The second is to understand what's already available. The third is to consider what you're going to create, how you're going to create it, and its sustainability. There are way too many products that are generated that don't have longevity, either because of funding or because actually they're not quite what people need, or they just replicate something that's already out there that's fit for purpose. So understanding those three strands. I think there's another really important one. It's often referred to as the innovator's dilemma, which is recognizing there's a kind of a lower and upper point of functionality in any solution which a customer needs or wants. And as a vendor, we can either pitch too low and miss that core functionality on day one, or also as an established edtech vendor, there's also an inclination every year to add more features and functionality, whether it's based on feedback, but also whether it's just good ideas or you want to respond to what the competition are doing. And over time, that product tends to move well above the curve of what schools really need. We've learned a really important lesson the last 18 months, that actually flexibility, scalability, ease of use trump functionality in many, many ways. Schools want easy, maintainable solutions, preferably device agnostic, that don't tie them into an ecosystem for the long term. So I think for all vendors, I think it's a really important one to reflect. And at the right time is when you need to disrupt. You need to move the setting on the dial, start afresh, take what you know best, but reinvent and redeliver it so that it's fit for purpose in a 21st century school.
And yes, you can find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn, but it's not that important to find me. I'm not important. Like, I'm just, we're running Century. I think that the technology and where it can go is really, really promising. The impact it's having is really exciting. And if there's something that you want to do that you think, oh, this has maybe inspired or motivated me that it's possible, it's definitely, that's wonderful. And have a look at that. But the people that you really need to reach out to are the people on the ground.
If you are inclined, you can find me on Twitter, @alkingsley_edu, LinkedIn. Just search for Al Kingsley. Hopefully I will pop up on the list. If you want to find me from a website point of view, then I would always encourage you to head across to netsportsoftware.com, or if you want to, alkingsley.com.
Our Twitter handle is @TuteEducation. I'm on Twitter as well, @BrownVJB, and our website, tute.com.
Thank you to our three guests, Al, Priya, and Vanessa, for some really powerful insights. And I can imagine many schools, as well as edtech companies, actually revisiting the key points. There were so many really valid points about the guiding principles and making sure you've got a solution that actually hits a need. And I think the key thing about the fact that ease of use trumps functionality is really important, but making sure that you've got the right voices that can provide solutions, the evolution of solutions, but principally that it makes a difference to the education of young people. So a very powerful start to the 6th episode of the EdTech Show. But before we continue, let me hand over to Ollie with a feature he's going to share with us.
Thanks, Bookie. I'm actually going to share a little bit of news based on my segment in this evening's show. And that is that all of the reports that I put the researcher under the questioning eye of are freely accessible through the Chartered College of Teaching. And I've been a fellow since the Chartered College of Teaching, pretty much since it began. Bookie, I know you're a fellow too, as is Mark, and I believe Roden is as well. So I think we all four of us are fellows of the Chartered College of Teaching. But Bookie, you're a huge advocate for supporting initiatives, institutions in education. Why should people get involved with the Chartered College of Teaching and visit their website, chartered.college?
So thank you. No, put me on the spot there. You can any changes within education, you have it at your fingertips. It's really interesting, and you've got an opportunity to take part in discussions to influence how things could actually be shaped. And I know it feels very challenging, but I think it's very exciting. What I also love is the fact that you've got training opportunities at various levels. So whether you're an ECT that's very new to the profession to more experienced teachers, there is something for everyone, even the chartered teacher status. And I always get the acronyms wrong. There are lots of opportunities for experienced leaders as well as teachers to develop themselves and actually have certification proving that. I think it's also powerful as part of the membership, which I think is quite reasonable for a year. You have access to research. And as someone that has, researching DNA as part of, like the science and things like that, as well as you, Ollie, I think it's a really powerful way just to keep knowledge at your fingertips, looking at the evidence and looking at what makes a real and meaningful difference to education as well. So I personally think it's very powerful. I'm glad to be a fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching, and I think that many other people will benefit from it as well.
Completely agree, and thank you for helping me out with my news segment. I'd like to add, though, that whilst it is a membership organisation, the 4 reports that I quizzed the researcher about, Dr. Lisa Muller, are freely accessible. Not everything is behind the membership paywall, as it were. They do put out content for everybody for the good of education. So there are 4 reports on effective blended learning over the last 2 years. Are all freely accessible. You can find them on their website. And after the show, I'll post the links to them. But without further ado, I'm going to bring up my segment this month, in which I got to interview Dr. Lisa MurrayMuller, who's education manager or education research manager at the Chartered College of Teaching. And I felt that it was important, picking up on Al's strand there of having everybody in the conversation, that actually we took the opportunity on the Edtech Show to speak to a researcher that's researching EdTech, its influences in education. Here it is.
So my name's Lisa MurrayMuller. I'm Education Research Manager at the Chartered College of Teaching.
The report itself contains so much information, and you must have distilled so many different sources to get to the point of releasing this report. What surprised you the most about your findings and why?
Excellent question. I think probably our finding around live teaching not necessarily always being the most effective approach, because I think we can easily jump to the conclusion that live teaching ought to be the best method, given that you're online with your teacher and your students at the same time, you're working on something together, you've got all your peers there. But actually, when you dig into the evidence, and also as we've spoken to teachers, school leaders as part of our reports, it really became clear that live teaching depends so much on everybody's availability, technological access, digital skills, but sometimes with younger students, for example, there can be concerns about screen time as well. So I think that was probably one of the findings where my colleague Gemma Goldenberg and I, when we were starting to dig into the evidence, we were slightly surprised, which made it all the more interesting, because that's why we do what we do, that we actually want to look at the evidence that's out there rather than sharing any preconceived ideas about most effective approaches to teaching. I think when it comes to early years in particular, as with many other areas in education, but there can be a potential tendency of policymakers, sometimes teachers, practitioners working in the early years, to see technology in a very negative way, and that's due to some studies that have been published that assign a very negative role and a potential negative impact on students' development when they're still very young. But I think there is a lot to unpick there. So whilst the evidence on technology for very young students, particularly 0 to 1.5, 2, does indicate that apart from interactive phone calls, for example, so video calls, passive consumption of media is potentially detrimental to children's development. An interactive approach where teachers or parents engage students, children with media and co-watch, for example, media where there are some personalities that would engage them, that would really actively engage students in the learning process, from the age of around 2.5, 3 years onwards, can actually be very beneficial for students' learning. So it's really about that interaction. And there is actually a great account out there that I could recommend to some of you out there, Polish speakers, I'm afraid, but of an excellent researcher in the field, Dr. Joanna Kołak on Instagram, who digs into that a little bit deeper and really unpicks the evidence around media use in very young children. SEND, as everyone knows, it's a very complex label. It is a label that hides a lot of the heterogeneity that that students face in terms of their needs, and that's really something that in our survey with teachers, both at the start of the pandemic and a bit later on in our fourth report, when we talked to them, it really became quite clear that it is important to go beyond labels. So, for example, one thing that we uncovered was that, say, students with autism, some students with autism may very much benefit from an approach that focuses very much on online learning, because they may not feel as comfortable in the classroom environment. They may benefit from that additional flexibility or the possibility of overlearning, which is why recorded content can be very beneficial. However, not all students on the autism spectrum will equally benefit from these resources. So it is important to really go beyond the labels and dig deeper into the specific needs that children with special educational needs have. However, of course, one big advantage that technology provides is the access to accessibility software. So again, this was something that teachers that we spoke to highlighted, that making content more accessible for students with visual impairments or hearing impairments, for example, can be easier actually online than it is in an everyday classroom environment where that technological support may not be available. The ability to personalize content so that students who may need some adjustments, either increasing font size, for example, or changing background colors, anything like that, or slowing down recordings. All of that is so much easier if you have got that technological support there, and that isn't as easily achieved in a face-to-face classroom. Now, when it comes to live teaching, for example, a few features that we highlighted, or that jumped out to us when we looked at the research evidence and that we hadn't necessarily thought of before, were things like ensuring that video quality is good, so that students who rely on lip reading can actually focus on, can actually see the speaker's lips and face. Similarly, a busy background can distract students, particularly those who have some attention difficulties, from the lesson, but also distract from the face, and so make it much more difficult for students with hearing impairments to lip read. Around dress and the fact that it may be easier for students to concentrate and to focus on facial expressions if teachers and others wear kind of unicolored clothes. So then, of course, another feature that is available in Zoom software or others in video conferencing are automated subtitles, automated captioning, and whilst that's not ideal, it can help when it comes to comprehension. One of the things that has come through in our fourth report, where we spoke to teachers about their digital strategies, really is the use of resources that are already out there to lower their workload, because I think it has become quite clear throughout over the past nearly 2 years now that this digital learning strategy can lead to an increase in workload among teachers, but by using resources that are out there and that are considered high quality to support ongoing teaching in a school, that could provide a good balance between available resources, and some that teachers may want to create themselves because they may be more personal, more approachable, and more specific to a particular content that they want to cover in their lessons. And in our fourth report also, we actually provide a nice table that compares pre-recorded resources and live teaching, as well as commercially available resources and teacher-made resources, and kind of weighs up the advantages and disadvantages there, because of course, as we said at the very start, live teaching has got some advantages to it. It's nice for students to see their teachers and vice versa. It makes the learning experience a personal one. But on the flip side, if you want to, it does require everyone to be available at the same time. And in particular, during a pandemic when schools were closed to the majority of students, then it may have been difficult for students to access a digital device to access their learning at a particular time. So balancing that with some asynchronous learning, some recorded learning, can lower teacher workload and also make it easier for students to follow. And if we now look at that in our current context, where students are self-isolating, again, linking in with some existing resources, providing those students who need to self-isolate with some existing resources to support their learning, instead of having to create a whole new recorded unit of learning for these students whilst you're also teaching face-to-face in the classroom, can help substantially to ensure that everyone gets a positive learning experience. We saw a statistically significant difference between primary and secondary students when it came to their teachers assessing the importance of providing a space for students to simply interact socially online. And we hypothesized that potentially that was due to the fact that primary school students may not necessarily have that opportunity outside the school setting, so they may not be on social media, they may not have a mobile phone to contact their peers, and obviously when they were not able to meet outside in the park or in extracurricular activities, and obviously not in school because schools were closed, providing that space online for students to simply see each other, to simply say hello and chat about things that were on their minds was really, really important. And I think we can't underestimate the importance of technology when it comes to that, and to supporting student well-being and also teacher well-being, their ability to check in with their students, making sure that they're safe, that they're well. That's really important. And it's something that we may want to reconsider in school systems more widely, how we incorporate breaks and different forms of learning, so that we ensure that students continue to be engaged and motivated and concentrated. Because given what we know about concentration and attention spans, it is arguably rarely a good idea to have 50-minute, 1 hour long, or sometimes even longer lessons without breaks, whether they are online or offline. Looking at the evidence, we need to be quite careful about the recommendations that we make around blended approaches to learning. I think blended approaches to learning, and by this, or hybrid approaches, as some may want to refer to them, can be really, really powerful. And there is evidence out there that even having some students follow from the comfort of their homes and others being at the same time in a lesson can work. However, that evidence stems mainly from university settings and settings that have access to the necessary technology. And by that, I mean tracking cameras and lapel microphones and multiple screens in the classroom. So I think it is really important that we consider that when we try to make recommendations for current classrooms and blended or hybrid approaches where we'd have some students following from home because they may be self-isolating whilst others are in the classroom. Because unless we have access to the necessary technology, very often either one group or the other may not get the best out of this learning experience, given that they may miss what is being said, or peers or teachers may move out of the frame, so they can't follow the lesson. They may not be able to interact with others as well. So it requires some very careful planning and potential substantial investment into technological devices in schools to make it happen, because it can work, but it does require the necessary technology and potentially human resources as well to monitor chats and any questions that are coming in from students who are off-site. So yeah, I think again, something where it's important to consider the context in which we apply any of these research findings. I think what we've seen in the UK and elsewhere is the big impact that this crisis has had and is continuing to have on those students who cannot access digital learning for various reasons. The most disadvantaged, who have been sharing devices at home or who simply didn't have appropriate devices. And schools have done so much in our reports that we have published, 4 in total throughout this crisis. We really saw that schools have stepped up and really gone above and beyond to try and provide their students with access to the necessary technology. So it's very important that teachers and school leaders and policymakers, of course, take that into consideration. And I think there has been a strong focus on the most disadvantaged students, and quite rightly so. And I think what's interesting, because you asked about regions where maybe the internet is not as widely spread, households maybe not necessarily have a stable or any internet connection or digital devices. And it's interesting to see what other approaches have been used in other countries to still make learning available and to ensure that students engage with their learning, such as radio programs, TV programs, or hard copy paper learning packs. And that was also, so for example, paper-based learning packs. In our report that in our study that we conducted with teachers, we saw some age differences again there, which was quite interesting. We saw that primary school teachers were more likely to have provided such packs to their students than teachers in secondary school, which again probably links in with that question around digital use in younger learners, their ability to access online learning, their engagement with online learning, but also concerns about excessive screen time. So it goes to show that, of course, digital learning has got great potential, but it does require the necessary access to technology and a stable internet connection. But also that alternative approaches do exist and can be very effective when it comes to supporting learners. And if we've seen or confirmed one thing during our studies that we've conducted during this crisis, something that we knew before, but now we have the data to back it up, is just how innovative and creative teachers and school leaders have been and continue to be in supporting their learners and ensuring that they can access their learning. Potentially, it could be using digital technology to improve feedback strategies, because I think what we're seeing at the moment is a stark rise in teacher workload. Teacher workload has been on our agenda for such a long time. We know that it is unsustainable. We know that it is strongly associated with teachers leaving the profession, with teacher retention. So if we can address it, then we should. And using digital technology to improve our feedback strategy and at the strategies, and at the same time lower teacher workload, I think that is one focus area that is probably worth considering. And we really saw that verbal feedback, so as I said, this ability to comment on student work had an impact on student motivation and engagement, because they actually were able to hear their teachers' voices rather than just reading a long paragraph. It can help those students who may not be able to access writing as easily. So students with special educational needs, students with English as an additional language, for example. We are now focusing at the moment on conducting a literature review on blended approaches to CPD in particular. So really focusing on that question of which activities benefit from being online and what type of activities benefit from being offline or face-to-face. In particular with an arts focus, because it is a project that we are conducting in collaboration with the Paul Hamlin Foundation. So I'd say watch this space. Hopefully we'll be able to share some insights on this topic.
So a really interesting segment there. Huge thanks to Lisa Maria for that. A lot to unpick, a lot of takeaways. Really some messages resonate there, such as the importance of continuing to prioritize the conversation around workload and making sure that EdTech and new EdTech technologies really consider that and ensure that the development of tools reduce teacher workload. So before we crack on with the final segment for this evening's show, I just wanted to mention that there's a really interesting piece of research that has been published recently. It's available on the Global EdTech website if you go to the research section, and you may be able to see the link, scroll along the bottom in a moment. But essentially, it's a report into pandemic learning loss published by the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, which was co-hosted by the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, bit of a mouthful that, UNICEF's Office of Research, and also the World Bank. So some big hitters there. And the report's really interesting. It makes for compelling reading. And essentially, they have sort of described the huge impact of COVID, and we all know and have been part of the conversation around learning loss, but it's quite stark to see it on a global level. 1.6 billion children shut out of school. We're quite fortunate in Western countries with access to tools like Google and Microsoft, but in a lot of countries, obviously around the world, students have missed a huge amount of time from school. And the report concludes really with a recommendation to policymakers and governments that more needs to be done to lead catch-up programs, so we don't have a lost generation in educational terms. Right, so my segment for this evening's show is all around digital storytelling with video. It's essentially a conversation between Lex Lang, who's the Deputy Head of Teaching and Innovation at Caterham Prep School, and Eric Reistad, MD of WeVideo, a platform, of course, that we use here for the show. And the whole focus of the segment is to explore how digital storytelling can be introduced in your curriculum? Thank you, Ollie.
For me, if I would be to start, for me, digital storytelling is all about bringing across a message to an audience, whether it's to an audience or a receiver, whether it's a student around you, your teacher, your family, your friends, your fellow employees, and in order for others to share your perspective and really understand it, it's important to plan and prepare that story or that message, to develop it, to refine it, and really prioritize the most important aspects of it, what you're trying to say. And this boils down to the essence of communication, reflection, and sharing of opinions, and which would all be key aspects of 21st century skills. And those who master those skills have a bright future ahead of them.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think sort of when you look at the top 10 skills for 2025 that was put together by the World Economic Forum, and they regularly update as they go through, you look at the number of those skills that are to do with collaboration and active learning, problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity and originality. And lots of that is about giving the tools to be able to talk about what you're learning, talk about what you're passionate or enthusiastic about, and approach things from different angles within schools. We know as adults actually that we learn best a lot of the time when we talk about something, when we explain something to somebody else, when we're asked a question about it, and then we have to try to get into unpacking it. And that counts so much for the children as well. Regurgitating an answer can help. It can prove knowledge to some extent, but to actually really deepen it, the core of that is telling stories. It's something that most of us, it's something that we can do even as very, very young children, is tell stories. And as we build up those skills to be able to talk about what we're, to tell our story in different ways, to record our information in different ways, if we can give the children tools to share their ideas and demonstrate and unpack them, it's huge.
So to answer that question, I would tie that to what Lex just mentioned, and really the process of digital storytelling, which is it's a quite specific method. It's a step-by-step process, which is really collaborative and it's creative. And it starts with usually a group of students coming together, brainstorming ideas and concepts about a specific topic. So they'll have to start to learn about that topic first, and then brainstorm and figure out, okay, what is the angle we're trying to say here? The next step would be to write on a piece of paper, on a Chromebook, whatever, write your story, write a script, write it from A to Z. You know, this is the story I would tell about my topic. And then gradually in this process, you're taking this from a piece of paper onto a more creative visual world. You're envisioning scenes in your story. You're envisioning music, text, effects. You're gradually taking your written story over to a recorded voiceover, potentially. You have your scenes, so you need some images. You might want to do a recording with your camera and really stitch this together into something which is audiovisual. And that process going from from the brainstorming process onto a gradually more visual world is a visual process. And all of this is tied into the notion of deeper learning, because you're working with that content, you're working with the story, you're working with the ideas and concept all the time. And when you're done, you'll publish a finished product, whether it's a podcast or a video, and you'll share it with your audience, and you'll get feedback, you'll get reflection. And all of that in that digital storytelling process will strengthen your learning about that specific topic. So for me, that's the big educational benefit of creating a video. You're doing it for a purpose. You're not doing it for fun. You're doing it to learn. That would be my take on that.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur. I think the really big thing we're seeing is it's building the skills, and it brings with it a motivation within the children to want to build their own skills. I think that's huge. The approachability of it, and the way that children can approach it in their own way. And I say children, but within this, I mean adults as well, frankly, that there are so many different avenues in, but actually each of those leads to builds a map of skills that are drawn in as you go. Given a simple task, it gives those children the tools to explore and refine and share their knowledge, but to approach it in a way that is initially comfortable to them, but then broadens out from there. And that means that they're just kind of constantly on the edge of being pushed outside the comfort zone. And I think if you can bring that approach where people feel confident to push themselves further and confident to explore because they want to know, the question I get asked constantly is, I want to do this, how do I do that? And to which my response is usually, how do you think you would do that? And they can go and develop that. So actually they're bringing in so many different cross-curricular angles on any task. They are asking questions, so they're bringing the information they already know, but then that will lead to other questions. They'll want to explain it and say, actually, I need to know more about this. Can I go find out? I was asked today, one of the children, can I look up such and such, because I'm making a point about this and I've realized I'm not really sure about this bit and I just want to check. Fantastic. And the motivation that comes there, and then the fact that they can tell that in their own way, that they can use their voices, that they hear what they sound like, they see what they look like. They're developing a sense of how they tell the stories, how they share their information. The fact that they can pull in, that they can bring in images or text or video clips or things to support what they're talking about, means for children, regardless of, I suppose it means that the process enhances their ability to deliver the message and explore their skills rather than limiting it. And I think sometimes in education, when children are forced down one specific channel as to how they record it, a lot of the time the recording gets in the way. The recording of their idea, if it's in writing or something, can get in the way of them delivering their actual knowledge or developing it. Working through video gives children that flexibility and that sort of there's a sort of naturalness to it. That's a terrible term, in exploring their understanding.
Wouldn't you also say, Lex, I mean, we've seen a lot of students in classrooms throughout the years, and it's kind of that Steven Spielberg feeling that you see these kids get that Steven Spielberg feeling, and it's really a feeling of pride, right? They wanna share, they wanna let you know, look at this, I created this, and this is something I've been learning about at school, and this is how I present it. There is a sense of pride. And there's a sense of motivation in that process, which is really, it's just really motivating to look at,
Yeah, absolutely. And that they will be working on their own independent projects, and as you said, they will refine and they will develop and they will show it to one another and they will show it to their families, and they'll work on the little side projects at home that will then reinforce what they're working on. And it's always, I think it's the always there-ness about it helps, that it is something you can constantly redraft and improve. Means that there is, again, that motivation to make something better, not just to do something that's good enough and move on. I think that is a really important educational benefit as well, is the idea that you can always improve. You can always refine your product, refine your understanding. So for us, we've been using WeVideo for a number of years, and we've been using it in a growing number of different ways. I think initially we used it as a way to sort of produce content for children to see and for them to make it in a relatively linear fashion. Again, talking through some of the core of making structured projects, working up from note taking. And again, as I said earlier, lots of these skills are ones that we sort of build and reinforce as we go. So it's note taking, it's scripting, it's working on a number of sort of English skills, but also collecting together, assembling knowledge and refining what you'll use, which is applicable right across the curriculum. But actually what we've been doing, as well as being able to use it in a structured layer, and I think that's useful getting started as a teacher, is working on clear projects with sort of structured phases, so that we have the sort of drafting ideas, collecting information, refining and script, and beginning the filming and then editing processes. We've begun to use it in a wide number of other ways that have been very useful for us right across the board. One thing that's been really helpful for us is in assessment and self-assessment. So again, coming back to how we learn through talking, one way that we've been evidencing learning through, again, using sort of tests and things like that is one way to assess knowledge, but actually getting somebody to talk to you about how they learn and what they've done and how they do it is so powerful, and has been really transformative in some of the ways that we assess subjects that don't necessarily lend themselves to testing, or actually just alongside any of that. If you get someone to talk to you about their project and how they've done it in the way that as children, I guess we would have had to put together a kind of a folder of evidence, but frequently that didn't happen anyway. What you can do with screen recording, or with somebody putting together a short video to introduce and talk about what they've learned, that again drives the desire to explain things better. And once we've started launching tasks like this, I will regularly have children saying to me, is there a way, can I take photos of my work and put those in? Yes. Can I record myself rotating my model so I can show it from different angles? Yes, absolutely. Can I green screen that and put it in the background? Yes. And I think a huge thing, I will come back to the power of yes and all of these things, but finding different ways for children to demonstrate their learning has been really powerful. And we're using that to sort of set up video portfolios for different subjects, where that's a better way to demonstrate your learning than you could by taking photos and sticking them in a book or writing it out in paragraphs. A lot of that, I think, a really powerful thing right early in my journey of using video in school was joining a lesson in another school where children were recording their learning any way they wanted to. And one of them asked if they could video it in a science experiment, while somebody else was frantically taking notes and trying to draw a graph. And I asked the teacher about that, how they felt about it. And they said, the point of this lesson is understanding, in this case, the effect of a magnet on a field. The point of this lesson is not to draw a graph. And if somebody videoing it happening and then talking about it means that they can convey that in more detail and understand it better, why would I make them sit there and draw axes in a book? And it really cuts through to what we're trying to do. And it makes us as teachers think about, what is the point of the learning here? And if we can pull the focus into the point of the learning, video can be an extremely powerful tool to keep the children focused on what they're learning and how they understand it. Another thing that's been really, really helpful as a tool and managing it is doing collaborative projects. So this is something that's been really helpful with video, and particularly with the WeVideo classroom that has recently been introduced, which really prioritizes or facilitates collaborative projects for the children is them being able to work together. Again, collaboration is a really important angle in those list of skills for life, but actually just as part of learning, it helps children to understand if they can ask one another questions, if they can share their knowledge with one another. And it means that they then look at how tasks are built. It allows them to deconstruct tasks. I think you've had 3 top tips. The first one will be to focus on the skills. Let's think about what it is we want our students to be learning, to be able to do, and those will emerge. The process is how we get there, but focus on the skills. Second one is things go wrong. I think it's really important for children to see us modeling that, modeling the learning process. When we're trying something new, when we're learning in new ways, try it. I think it's important that children see us do that they aren't afraid to try something new, make a mistake, approach it, redraft it, come back to it, and grit your teeth, smile, and move on and keep going with anything new. And the last one, as I mentioned earlier, is lean into yes and why not. I think it's so important that we don't need to know it all. As teachers, we feel an enormous pressure to know it all, and we don't have to. We can join our students on the learning journey, learn with them, model solving problems together, and you will find that the motivation is reflected back to them, and we'll see it in them.
Hi, Bucky. I think you're on mute, Bucky.
Damn, almost had an episode without me actually muting myself. So it starts again. So I just wanted to say thank you to Eric and Lex for emphasizing the importance of developing digital literacy skills through storytelling. And what a powerful way to end episode 6. Thank you to everyone that's actually joined us this evening. And if you're watching on replay, thank you for joining in. But please comment below. It's great. It's a great way for us to see the takeaways you're actually having and for us to engage with you as well. Please join us again for episode 7 on Thursday, the 17th of March at 7 p.m. to see more of our features within the Edtech Show. But in the meantime, stay safe, take care, and see you all soon. Bye.